Welcome to Caffeinated Mornings, a show built around the idea of more conversation and less presentation. We dive deeper into discussions that go beyond the surface of the work. A big thank you to our sponsors who make this show possible. Today's episode is brought to you by the award-winning, strategically driven, independent, full-service agency TDA Boulder. And we can't forget Buck Ross Productions and Coop Studios for helping us capture and share this show with you. A special thanks to The Copyright for keeping us caffeinated, and to Realtor Michelle Sander at Live Sotheby's Realty, CMCI Studio, Snappy Little Numbers for our theme music, and Pro Photo Rental for their continued support. In this episode, we join your favorite designer and host, Jay Farrakane, for an inspiring and deeply thoughtful conversation with lettering artist and creative director, Kevin Cantrell. Kevin shares his path from traditional graphic design to his masterful work in ornate typography and branding. He opens up about creative discipline, building a legacy through timeless design, embracing craftsmanship in a digital world, and staying rooted in purpose and working on the things that really matter. So get comfortable, get caffeinated, and prepare to be inspired by the wisdom, detail, and passion of Kevin Cantrell. Let's go.
Thank you, Kevin, for being here. Today's guest is Kevin Cantrell. Kevin is a master of lettering, typographic design, branding, blending meticulous craftsmanship with powerful storytelling. Kevin is the founder and creative director at Kevin Cantrell Studios, and now also Kevin Cantrell Type. And he also crafts custom typefaces, identities, packaging, and has worked with great brands like Nike, Bacardi, Princeton, UNICEF, National Geographic, Oscars. Did I leave anything out? Probably missed something in there. But before we get into today's talk with Kevin, I think it's really interesting. We're going to spend a few minutes just looking at some of his work. And so I'm going to share that with you guys right now. And I'm really good on my slides. So we're going to sit back, let the music build, and enjoy. so impressive, right? And it's kind of crazy because I think everyone now is going to go and update their portfolios because they're like, dude, we can't compete. Well, thank you for being here. We're super excited to do this, and we're just going to dive in.
Okay.
You've really carved out a fairly unique place in the world of like typography and branding. Is there a particular point in like your background where you can say like, this is why I'm going to go do what I'm going to start doing? Was there like a defining moment? You're like,
Yeah, I had a regular job at an agency, and I worked at a regular agency. I spent the first 5 years of my career working on a lot of things I just didn't enjoy doing. I mean, I'd say the low part of my career was when I was decapitating. Is that better? Oh, there we go.
better.
So I worked in an agency the first 5 years of my career, and I'd say like the low part or the most depressing part of my career was when I was decapitating Fran Dresser and putting her on the body of some model in a home shopping network ad
No
for
way.
storyboard. And I'm like, what am I doing? What's my
life?
What's my life like? Because I was storyboarding commercials for the home shopping network. And now, granted, that was at a time right after the '08 crash, and so I was grateful because I was going to New York. I had a job lined up, place where I interned at, but with the economy kind of tanking in '08, they retracted their offer. On the morning of my honeymoon, I got my offer retracted. So
No
I
way.
just got married. I was getting ready to go to New York, and the morning after I got married, got a phone call from the
recruiter or
the
HR person?
HR department saying, "Yeah, sorry, you don't have a job anymore." So I'm like, "Oh shoot! Like, what am I going to do now?" So, but luckily, the place I was freelancing for, they hired me. So I'm very grateful because I had a job, and they taught me. Although I didn't necessarily, and there were some clients I really enjoyed working on, and I love the people I work with immensely. But because of the crash, there was just not many opportunities, and I also felt like I had more type that just was untapped within me, and I needed some way to show that. And so, after doing the home shopping network ads, working on one for friend, I can't even remember what it was for. I'm like, I got to try something else. So in my free time, I started just working on some really crazy type experiments, and the first was the Illuminati's project, and so that was like my first custom type piece. And then once I started to learn type and custom lettering, I started to try and bring that into some of the branding work I was doing. And then someone in the UK, the owner of Fetch and Park, they saw my Illuminati's work, and they also saw another brand I just done, which
Where
was.
did they see the work?
Sorry?
Where did they see the work?
They saw it on Instagram,
Oh,
which
there you go.
I don't usually get work from Instagram, actually,
Yeah.
which is funny. I get very little work. Actually, I get more work from Behance than I do from Instagram.
Huh.
But at that time, and this was very early on in Instagram. I guess I'm getting a little older these days.
Yeah.
But so they saw my work, and also the branding work I did for Hawthorne and Wren, which was like the first custom monogram I'd done. And so with that, they're like, hey, we'd love you to rebrand us. And so I did that. And then once I'd done that, then I started work. I got work for a hotel, the Cotton House Hotel, and that was where I designed my first typeface. Actually, I swore I would never design a typeface in school. I'm like, I hate this. Why would anybody want to do this? But it was mostly the approach. There's this project we have in school. It's called the Deseret Alphabet, which is this unique alphabet to early Utah pioneers because they had so many immigrants that were coming to Utah. They're like, well, let's make a language everybody can learn. That would be easier and just facilitates, I guess, just people being able to communicate much clearer. It's a really hideous alphabet. It's like, I don't know who designed it or whatever, but anyway, so one of the test projects they have you do is to design this alphabet. If you've never, it's really hard to design letter forms in abstraction if you're not familiar with how to draw letters.
Right.
And so I had no idea how to design a typeface as a student. I'm like, this sucks. Like, why am I doing this? And so I swore I would never design a typeface, but I didn't know how much I would enjoy it. And especially but now I will say this, I actually do this with my students. I actually do have them do the Deseret Alphabet because it is really useful to design positive space, negative space in abstraction, because it does help facilitate learning how to draw the proper forms. And so that was again, but I kind of approach it differently with my students with how I approached it too. But yeah, so didn't like my job, at least the projects I was working on. Loved the people I worked with, learned a lot at the agency. I learned how to manage a business. I learned client relationships, how to manage how to be methodical, how to be process-driven,
Right.
strategic. Because all my work is very, obviously I'm very known for ornamentation and I guess you could say the various styles that I employ in my work, but it's all narrative and story and concept driven. Because at the end of the day, ideas last and style varies and fluctuates. So
It is interesting because I meet a lot of creatives, number one, who usually find their path because of largely the work of graphic design. We are fortunate. We like it, right? Like there's something cool about it. But then you're like, when I'm doing the Fran Drescher head replacement, you kind of do ask yourself of like, why am I doing what I'm doing?
Yeah.
I've also noticed a thing, and even about myself recently, that I actually realized like, oh, I still like learning. And I think that's an interesting thing because as I talk to more and more creatives, I know you studied graphic design at BYU. You're in the midst of a MFA. How close are you to the finish of that?
I have a year left,
Okay.
just under a year left, yeah.
And we're going to show a key
Yeah, we're
project.
going to talk about that. Yeah.
Talk about like where formal education has fit into all of this. Because formally trained graphic designer, you usually have a fairly decent base of like, okay, I know what I'm going to go do. But then it seems like you've just been kind of like shifting what you've wanted to for so long. And now teaching itself, it's like, how do they all work together?
Yeah, it's funny. I also swore I would never teach. My professor I work with now, who's the head of the program, because I teach at BYU. Totally, it's kind of learned that the hard way, I guess. But so I kind of laughed at it because he approached me like I would say 6-7 years ago and trying to recruit me to teach there, and I'm like, I have no interest in teaching. Like, why would I do that? I don't want to be a washed-up teacher, and here I am, a washed-up teacher now. No, but once when you also your priorities in life and you as a person change. I mean, I have 6 kids, and as I get older, what's really important comes more into focus. And the things that endure and last become much more meaningful to you. And my children are much more important to me than my work. Like if I took up all my accolades and I put it on a scale, my family, my children would be they'd be way much more than that, because like that's my life. That's
I always tell people that the best project you'll ever work on is your family.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've won every award I want to win at this point, and don't get me wrong, that was, that gave a lot of confidence. It was very satisfying. But watching my children grow, learn, and become amazing people is infinitely more satisfying and enduring. Because at the end of the day, I mean, I've rebranded a lot of companies, but they're gonna rebrand again in 10, 15. I mean, how long will my work really last? I don't know. It's hard to know that.
Does that idea of permanence come into your mind as you're like making things, or even when they're kind of like the project's wrapped up?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, one of the reasons, and we'll get into the MFA stuff, but because that's much more meaningful and what I'm trying to do with that. But I mean, at the end of the day, there are projects there's certain things it's funny because I do a lot of alcohol, but I've never drunk an ounce of alcohol in my life. But I do a lot of liquor brands, and I always preface like, oh, by the way, I don't drink, right? I just rebranded a wine label, and I always preface just so that they're not shocked that I'm like, look, I've never tasted wine. I don't know what it tastes like.
Hey, can we send you a case? Or
yeah, I'm like, yeah, please send it, but send it to my business partner because he'll really enjoy it. And I do want the bottle because I need the mock-up on bottles and stuff, but you don't need to partake of it to know how to design around it.
Well, and it was interesting because you and I were talking a little bit earlier when we were in the lead up to this. We were talking about, and it comes up in talk here quite a bit, is the notion of art and design and how separate are they. And in simplest terms, usually art can be lumped into subjectivity. I felt like this today, and objectivity, I think, is where the heart of like, if I was still Jay just out of design school, I would be like, objectivity is what makes designers kind of impartial in what they're working on. And I was thinking about your work and knowing you didn't drink and working on labels and things like that. Yeah. But I also think that it's not as easy to bifurcate it. Is it objective or subjective? But you're coming at it from literally a more objective lens because you're like, I don't know what this tastes like or what it makes me feel like. So what's the embodiment? And you can probably listen to your client. Do you feel like you can listen to your client more clearly?
Of course. And now I will also, my business partner drinks too. And so he can put me on some of the nuances and the different, a red versus a white versus, all the different nuances there. So he does give me some information to go off of that. And I can, but again, at the end of the day, most of the wineries I work with or the spirits, they have an idea of what the story is. And I simply give them, I would say, the physical parameters of I bring it to life. I give it a physical form, the idea, and then also I help give them. I take their idea and I give them a vision. I'm like, this is the vision. This is what your brand can embody, and here's all the ways it can be disseminated across all these different touch points. And so,
well, and I know you're passionate about like storytelling and myth and things like that. And even what you were just talking about, how you build that into a brand. That's like how we start to bring that across. Are there any, in your kind of start of your career, was there early influences that were like, really pulled you in this direction of kind of like monolithic, big narratives? That's what I feel like when I look at your work, that there's a scale to it.
Yeah. when I was a student at BYU, I went to we just went on a trip to New York to various agencies, and one of the agencies was McGarry Bowen, and one of the co-founders there said something that kind of stuck with me. He says the best story always wins. And I'm like, okay, and I never really thought of it that way before, but one of the ways we relate the human condition and we connect is through story, and narrative is the way that we bind as humans. And if you go back thousands of years ago, at the core of all civilizations, once you get over about 150 people, the only way you can not fragment as a society into individual preferences and tribalism is through some binding mechanism, which is typically through mythology or symbols or rituals. And all of civilization has been like that in time memorial. Like, you have to have something like that. And once you lose that common narrative, that common vision, it's really hard to get along. And that was at kind of the crux of me going into my MFA, is there's just so much. There's always been heat in politics and stuff, and I'm not really interested in politics. I'm much more interested in the philosophy and the ideas, the belief systems that funnel into that, because politics is downstream of religion and beliefs. Now, whether it's organized or not organized, it's still predicated upon belief systems.
Right.
All of our laws are predicated upon a belief system, and you either let other people determine that for you, or you influence it the best you can. And so in mythology and stories, narrative, that's how we do it, is we either create false mythologies and narratives, or we try to embed some truths in them. And I'm very Christian, and I think one of the reasons the Bible's endured is because they're typically stories, or at least archetypes, that have been funneled and filtered over thousands of years. And the ones that have lasted the longest are the ones that typically have at least some kernel of truth in them. Whether they're framed by a mythological outline or framework, there's some principle in it that's usually quite profound. And they're typically societal experiments that have been successful. And obviously that doesn't mean that all traditions have to be perpetuated, but many of them have endured because there was a lot of value in them, and we should at least consider it highly before we discard it.
Well, and it goes back to what the agency owner said, that the best story wins.
Yeah,
Because
no,
that's what's
absolutely.
holding it
Absolutely.
all together.
And that's why, again, for my MFA, my graphic novel, and really my graphic novel is like 25 years in the making. I had the first idea when I was 14. Actually, I had a dream about it when I was 19, this really vivid dream of this story outline. I didn't even know what it meant until probably about 4 years ago. I had this dream. I've only told a few people this. So as part of my faith, so I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as Mormons, but Mormons is a much more, the full name of the church is quite a mouthful. Mormons is much easier to reference, or Latter-day Saints. And I was on a 2-year mission for my faith in Brazil. And I've been out for like 4 months. I was in the heat. I couldn't understand anything that's going on. I was just dead tired.
Do you speak Spanish or Portuguese?
Portuguese,
Okay,
yeah. Falo Portuguese, yeah. And I was just out there, and I'm just exhausted, depressed. I'm like, this just sucks. And so a member was there, and they just saw I must have looked horrible. So they like guided me into the bedroom, just put me like they like sleep. And I'm like,
Sleep it
okay.
off.
So I fell asleep, and I remember this dream. And in the dream, I'd already kind of started the idea for this novel, at least the framework for it, although it's evolved substantially since then. But in my dream, I was disembodied. And I rose above myself at different degrees until I was in the clouds. And I looked down on myself, and then suddenly I zoomed in and I saw myself at the particle level. And then I zoomed in more and I saw more complexity, more information. And then I zoomed back out, and then I went to kind of more cosmic level in the universe, and I could see all of this through light. And it kept kind of toggling or moving back and forth between this really like macro vision versus micro, and seeing all the information. And it was kind of playing on this idea of connection, of alignments with light, and anyway. But then, I guess we'll get to this eventually. But that kind of the idea for that came as I was working on the story, and then suddenly, like, I'm like, oh, that's what that is. It's this. But it took like 20 years before I realized that.
Well, and this is this.
Yeah, that's this. Kvadrant Chronicles. Yeah.
And so, I'm going to do a little bit of setup on the Kvadrant Chronicles. And I think the thing that's important here to know is you're currently in your MFA.
Yeah.
At BYU.
No, not BYU doesn't have an MFA. It's with VCFA.
Okay.
They're like probably the only remote program you can do that's accredited.
I think you mentioned that.
And they're now affiliated with CalArts. So I go to Cal. I do residency twice a year at the end of every semester. I just got back from actually, was it 4 weeks ago? So.
And it is, we have a lot of like designers on the show who have talked about no matter how busy they are, they kind of always find this space for personal projects.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, seriously, I don't know how I do it sometimes. 'Cause I have 6 kids. I teach full time. I have my studio, and I'm getting an MFA.
And
I don't sleep that much, I guess. Like, I don't. Yeah.
This is the trait, though. I think
And
that's where a lot of it
I run
happens.
50 miles a week. It's like my coping mechanism is running. Anyway.
But you need those little like
Oh,
pressure
yeah.
releases and
Absolutely,
those
yeah.
escapes.
Yeah.
So it's funny to, like, now to know the backstory, because I know you've been working on this physically, like, let's call it pen to paper, 4 years.
So I'm really good at abstraction and ideas, but I'm not like the best writer. But my brother's a really good writer, and I've been trying to kind of persuade him slowly for years. And he's also actually
So this is a
designer.
family affair.
It's family
too.
affair, absolutely, yeah. And so finally, I don't know how I convinced him, but he's like, you know what? I want to help you with this. Let's work on it together. And and I had so many gaps in kind of the world structure and the world build, and he came in and he just like. It was just magic. It just was like meant to be. It was just destiny. And we were able to collaborate on the story and stuff. So I do the illustration, he does the writing, and then we talk and we figure out like the philosophy behind it. And yeah.
A little bit of setup just to catch everybody up here. So like this is a very serious undertaking. We're going to talk like it's like a life project. I think is
Yeah, it is, and it might. It's every project. Like every time I've ever tried something different, whether it was lettering, branding, you kind of hope it's going to work out. You don't know. I mean, I put in. I mean, at this point, well, I don't know, thousands of hours. I mean, now I would say the bulk of the work started. Most of the work's been done in the illustration has been done in the last year and a half. Most of it in the program, yeah.
And I want so a little bit about this. So this will be.
Where did you get that image? How'd you get that?
Oh, this is a storyboard. Let's go back to here. Like we can't show any of this.
Oh my! I'm like. Is that from? Oh, I'm like. How did you?
These were in the storyboard.
Oh, because I sent you the reel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway.
'Cause that's not in the reel. Anyway.
Okay.
Did I email that to you? Anyway, never mind.
Yes, there was a PDF that came through. At one point.
Okay.
But the interesting thing to me was the whole construction of the story, and then watching the detail that you're building in this, and it's interesting to hear about the back past where you are working on storyboards, but much more in a. You're learning that skill set, right, of narrative and timing and how to pace things.
Now that's the funny thing. Going back to kind of where we started is with the home shopping network. I learned how to storyboard advertise commercials.
Yeah,
and that really helped in the narrative and communicating the story through that. Which it's funny how I took something that I really didn't enjoy, but the tools I learned from that really helped facilitate storyboarding this.
But I do think that I was saying to somebody earlier today that I do think graphic design as a career is it is somewhat cool and sexy from the outside, but when you get into it, and at least in my work experience, I wasn't as bad as working in a coal mine because that's physically but I've worked on some shit that is like will tear your soul out, and it's like you ask yourself why you're in it, but there are guaranteed takeaways that I learned by that kind of like drudgery work that have really built a foundation for everything else that I do. And now it's really interesting to see you build it into this life project that you're taking. So it'll be like, over time, it'll be 10 volumes.
It'll be 10 volumes, yeah. That's book one. This is the prequel to the whole thing. And it's 10 volumes. Each volume is about 80 to 100 pages, fully illustrated. And again, part of it depends on the feasibility. Like, I mean, maybe everybody looks and hates it. It's very possible people will look at it and hate it.
I don't know.
It's very likely.
The world of graphic novels, though, is really interesting. And I think it's one of the most underrated, like, visual art forms there is because of the amount of detail that goes into it and how many people don't really pay attention to it.
Yeah. It is a burgeoning market. There's a lot, and also, but there's a lot of beautiful graphic novels, but there's one common denominator. Is like most of them don't have any good typography in them. Like, why is there such a dearth of typography in the graphic novel universe? And I'm going to try and fill that gap. That's my goal. Because it's very, very tight. It's like type is essential to sacred type is what I call it to the narrative. It's very important to it.
Back to you working on your first alphabet. There's just some of the things to illustrate that will occur in this. You're not only doing all the visuals. Your brother's helping you write the kind of written narrative, but you're typesetting it. There's languages that exist, and this is like Dune, Frank Herbert level.
Yeah. So I made the language because it was key to the world of the mythology. Is I made the language. It's called the Quadrant alphabet, and it's a combination. It's a theoretical. I guess you could say in Christian theology, it's a theoretical Adamic language, origin language, and it's inspired by some of the phonetics of Portuguese because I speak Portuguese and it's a beautiful language. Structurally, it's inspired by Hebrew, some Indus scripts in its form, Hebrew and some of the symbols. So Hebrew is a really amazing language because every glyph in Hebrew has a numeric value. And so it creates beautiful symbolism. So for example, if you have the word Adam and you take the numerology from it, it creates the number 45. If you take Eve, it's 19. If you subtract the 2, you get 26, which is the number of Yahweh, meaning that God bridges the gap between humanity. And like a triangle, as a man and a woman, and which is an archetype of humanity, as humanity comes together through covenant with God, it lessens the disparity between us. We become more alike. We become more unified. It gives us a common vision that unifies rather than fragments of society. And that's really one of the core concepts behind the Quadrant Chronicles, is this idea of union.
So there is allegory, obviously, in...
Well, I wouldn't. It's not an allegory, but it is very metaphorical.
Right.
Like I mean, Lord of the Rings is highly, deeply Catholic. You have the Tree of the King.
Star Wars too, even if you really start to boil it down too.
It's definitely the hero's journey. And again, like all archetypes and all story common narratives, they have threads that connect across all cultures. That's why
they resonate.
That's why they resonate, exactly, because they convey the human condition in a way that unifies and connects. And there are these patterns that are embedded in reality that we observe. And I guess you put it this way, there's one question that frames all philosophy, and there's a couple ways we can frame it. And it's this question: am I God or am I not God? Meaning, do I for myself determine my moral compass, or do I defer it outside of myself? And that basically encompasses everything for Western and Eastern philosophy. And you can frame it in another way. Do I invent meaning and purpose, or do I discover it? And like Nietzsche obviously thought that you could invent it through art, but he was wrong, because like it just doesn't work. It's not a way you can morally frame society.
Right.
And that really, and it's a battle we all have. I mean, I'm constantly battling. Do I defer to my own preferences, my own wants, my own wishes, or is there some objective standard outside of myself that I try to align with? Is there truth embedded in reality? How do we observe it? I mean, so semiotics, Christianity observes it this way. So you have reality and you have the veil that separates us from reality. And we have instruments and tools for how we interpret reality. And most of that's through language, right, through glyphs. And Derrida would argue that all language glyphs are arbitrary. But the problem, and the thing that he never really figures out, is in all history, there's never been a single language that doesn't use opposition to define its terminology. Every language has this common pattern. It has to have opposition because it's part of the fabric of reality. And so when you talk about, because he basically says that every language is essentially a game of ping pong. You have one glyph that defers to its meaning to another glyph, which defers its meaning to another glyph, and endlessly. But I think there is actually a lot of truth in that. But the challenge is I would say it is completely arbitrary if there was no commonality among all cross cultures historically. And there are commonalities, opposition being one of them. And even then, even though we use different terminology across different languages to observe what water is, we can still point at it and say that's water. And so
it's an undeniable truth. And that was one of the things that you started talking a little bit about in the book, that there is a notion of like, and maybe I'm phrasing this wrong, but there is this notion of like some misinformation comes into. And I think
of course.
You as a typographer and a communicator, there's have you ever heard the famous David Carson quote, "Don't mistake legibility for communication"?
Legibility or readability or legibility for readability.
Yeah,
I can't remember. But the idea that it doesn't have to be perfectly legible to be understood.
Exactly. Like meaning if it was agitated, we could communicate something potentially about horrific war or something.
Totally.
Right? And I think it's interesting as you kind of like, as I've gotten peeks at the book, it's really interesting to see how much intention is being put into the kind of the structure of it all. And it's kind of interesting too, because like you're purposely introducing, and maybe this is me reading into it, but like you made mention of the fact that back to the veil, there is these things where you almost have to go unpack what's real or what's truthful.
Absolutely. Reality requires interpretation. It requires something, whether it's yourself making it up or you observing, whether it be empirically, but even empirical data requires interpretation.
Right.
What does it mean? What do we infer from this? What meaning do we imbue in those numbers and those statistics if we're simply looking at the data? And even then, data and science cannot give us, it can explain how we can get to Mars or the moon, but it can't explain why we would want to go to the moon and Mars. Like, that's not the purview of science.
Right.
Purpose and meaning it doesn't cover that. It simply explains a path of how we can feasibly get there in the objective world. And that's really the purview of the interpretation. How do we do that? And we can make it up ourselves, or we find standard that's common where we can find that. And to a certain degree, it's both. There's a bit of both, but yeah.
I think one of the things that, back to this notion of like art fitting neatly into this category and design fitting neatly into this category. I think in design school, I was taught super clear communication. If you want to make people guess, you go back to art, that kind of stuff. But I feel like that you, in this book, part of its goal is you may have a message or an intention in it, but is there a want for somebody to just develop their own understanding of what the story means and what it could mean to them? I have to believe that that's why so many people are drawn to.
Yeah, no, yes and no. Like, I think all great stories, you have characters, you have things that you resonate with because it touches you on a personal level, because there's something you've experienced that it resonates with. And to a certain degree, all great stories have to have that. But even Lord of the Rings is very much based on individual sacrifice, good versus evil, very classic archetypes. I mean, even if you go to like the books, Aragorn has like no flaws, and he's a very like classical hero where he's not tempted by the ring at all in the books. He knows who he is, and he's always that. And I get it. In a movie, it's they have to kind of give him some kind of a character arc, because how do you relate to someone who's perfect?
Right.
In a narrative form like that, because obviously, I guess you could say the refutation of that as well. Don't you worship Christ, who is perfect?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yes, because he's the archetype I guess you could say the apotheosis of all of the archetypes into one. And so he becomes the manifestation of the ideal standard that we all strive for, even though we fall short of it. But going back to like the Hebrew thing, the way we approximate him is through at-one-ment, which is atonement, is we become one with him through the mediation that he provides. But story, I think, is there will be the room for individual interpretation of what resonates with them. But the main, I guess you could say, crux behind the Quadrant Chronicles is this idea of coming together at one-ment, is finding commonality and coming together through that, discovering that.
Do you feel like when you kind of set out to, number one, it's a stage for you to kind of play out this beautiful visual story? I think the one thing we haven't talked about that a lot in this is there's this light communication in it. And it's a key part of the story. And it was interesting to take a glimpse at the storyboards and things like that and seeing how you might be manifesting light. Because it was I was drawing pictures. You shared a few things with me, and then I was like, oh, I think I understand, because he's mentioned these things in the past. And I think that's the fascinating part of storytelling, is seeing it through the lens of just the way you might not ever see it. And so like if you were to like, Jay, illustrate light, it probably would not be like the way that you did it.
Oh, no, yeah, right.
And I think that's the really interesting thing, that we as creatives, or as like commercial creatives, right? A lot of times designers, we're kind of like told almost what walls to paint within. And I look at your work a lot of times, and I think people come to you probably for a look, right?
Oh, yeah, oftentimes, most times. Yeah.
But I think the interesting thing, the book pulls the look into, do you feel like the book is an outlet for, I don't have anyone controlling me in like the way I have to talk?
Oh, yeah, so I mean, even with clients still, there are parameters you have to work within. There are rules and things you have to abide. And at the end of the day, I'm also, what differentiates art from design is I'm serving the needs of someone else and trying to relate and communicate their vision in a process that is obviously commercialized. And art is much more personal. It's much more about what your wants and your wishes, right? And so a lot of art I think some art can be very powerful in its way of conveying an idea that the artist has. And I think books, and especially graphic novels, still are trying to communicate in a way that's accessible, but it's not necessarily trying to serve commercialization in that sense.
Do you find it challenging? Like, you have such a distinct style, and you go to work with a big brand like Bacardi or something like that, right? Or even a Coke or whatever it is in the world. Do you find that you have like doors are opened a little bit, or do you have to adapt your style to kind of map to?
Yeah, it depends. It depends. Like, and I work in various styles, and I try to even, because I get bored if I do one thing over and over again. Like, I've done Victorian so much now. It's like, okay, I like Victorian, but yeah, there's only so many different looks you can do with Victorian, Well, like, although my book is actually, like, I call it Victorian Deco Noir. It's kind of because I'm trying to evolve, and it's very much me.
I see all of those.
Yeah, it's very much me, but it's kind of a new form, a new structure. But it's basically just a typographic playground. I'm like
Victorian.
Victorian Deco Noir.
Deco Noir. Because I see a lot of Art Deco in it.
Yeah, no, it's because it's a nocturnal world, which provides a lot of interesting things in terms of just contrast and shading, which provides a lot of really interesting things I can do with type and shadows. Because one of the big things is propaganda in my book, and going back to the idea of meaning, and do we invent it or do we defer it? Now, one of the pitfalls of deferment is if we defer it to the wrong people, they can construct our reality for us and determine a lot of those things for us. And a lot of it happens subliminally. We don't even notice it. Subconsciously, it happens. So much of the paradigms we have in society are just constructs that we inherit culturally. And it's sometimes very hard to see past that. And so like the idea, so visually also, it's very much inspired by 15th century Catholic engravings, the Reformation. And the original term of propaganda was coined then to combat the Reformation and heresy. And that's a very specific reason why I'm kind of channeling that look, because I'm essentially trying to say, and this is very much to do with Latter-day Saint Christian framework, is that there was a falling away from the truth and the necessity of a restoration of that. And I think that's a really good cyclical archetype of just humanity, is that we have these cycles where we realize what is true, or we have prosperity, we have abundance, we get along, and then we just go into war and we kill each other and mass murder, and that's horrible, you know?
Right.
But it's like, it's never ended. Like now there are some mythological cities in Christianity that did solve that. There's the city of Enoch, which was so perfected that it actually was taken from the earth. In the Book of Mormon, there's a civilization that established a utopian society for 200 years where there was no poor, there were no class distinctions, they were just all common, and they shared everything they had in common. They chose that, and they did it willingly because they were unified by their beliefs and covenants in Christ, and it created a perfect civilization for 200 years. Now, there are other ancient civilizations, their names are complex, going back where they had more egalitarian societies in, ancient indigenous areas and civilizations where even the housing, and again, part of that we're interpreting because we don't have a written record, although at least a written record we can
Right,
understand. Like the Hopewell people, they have etchings and engravings, but it wouldn't be like a traditional phonetic system. It may have been a language, we just don't know how to, we don't understand it yet. But they even organized their mounds based on cosmology, and within degrees of error, and how did they do that without
without modern tools or
exactly. I mean, the Egyptians did things that we still can't figure out how they built the pyramids, right? It's just one of the wonders that we're trying to figure out, and that's fascinating. It's like, what did we lose? And that's kind of Caravaggio. What have we lost? And how did we regain? How did we recapture that? And so the language, the idea behind that is, I call it star shifting. And so star shifting is inspired by blue shift, red shift, which is moving closer or away from a star. And as you get closer, you get the different shift color. And so star shifting is this idea, and the language I've created, the Caravaggio alphabet, every glyph represents a constellation. And as you draw these constellations, you shift the light from the stars into yourself. And so that gives you the ability to basically alter reality. And there are different orders within it. There's topaz, there's emerald, there's ruby, there's sapphire. And they give you specific attributes based on the star constellation that allows you to do things. Like topaz can manipulate time, sapphire space. Anyway.
In the lead up to this, you and I were talking about the complexity of the story. Do you have like a war room kind of like, with the red yarn, connecting all this stuff? And
Tyson and I just all in our heads. We could see pretty clearly.
We didn't even touch on this, but you've written music for this as well?
I did. Well, I'm not a musician, but I did some of the hymns in it. I did write, and that's like when we play the piece, it'll have a song that it begins with, which is in the Caravaggio language, and that is like a hymn I wrote for it. Yeah, I didn't sing it, not a singer, and I had I'm working with, like, the soundtrack was made with someone I'm partnering with on that.
Right.
Yeah.
It is funny because of the ornateness of the story, and even just your work in general. I think it's funny because one of my, and it's not a beef, but like one of the things that I see happening in graphic design right now is, and it's not a head towards minimalism with purpose. It's more of a head towards minimalism with, we don't know anything else. And I think it's a sensitivity towards that people are kind of overloaded right now too. But there's an efficiency that I see in that minimalism. But to me, it seems utility versus like designed or communicate. It's being done with intention of purity. I'm gonna leave it at that.
Okay.
Your work is really like incredibly intricate.
It's not efficient, I'll say that.
And I would imagine, and you even refer to the way that you kind of build it as like, it's like architecture.
Yeah, very much so.
And I think it's really, talk a little bit about that kind of like, what that means, and like the construction of the things you make. And how that, like, how do you get your mind around the organizational principle? And I know you have a category, you were saying it's like, deco noir kind of like vibe, but like, where does it, like, how do you kind of build the structure to get started and even get your work going? Like,
Yeah, it's so I call it it's actually something I learned in like one of my beginning art classes called the Gestalt principle, which is what we would do is we would take an existing piece of art and we would cut it up and have to reassemble it. I chose Picasso, of course, because that would be easy to cut it up because it's already fragmented. Thought I was really clever for that at the time.
did it turn out to be way harder than you thought?
No, it turned out to be really easy.
Okay.
Just took the different fragments and reassembled. I mean, he's already defragmented, so it didn't.
So, yeah.
It was super easy. But that principle of being able to take something and cut it up and then recompose and bring other pieces in. Like, so if anybody knows the studio Stranger and Stranger, phenomenal spirits design studio. That's I actually found it because I met with them. That's the exact same thing they use. Is they call it the collage technique. Is they cut up different pieces of other things and they put it together and recompose and create a new architecture for it. And great architecture and design has 3 levels of hierarchy. It has large, medium, and small. And the tension between those 3 points creates interesting compositions. And you can omit one of the tiers, like you could omit the medium and have large and small, and that could
you
still
get
work.
contrast.
Yeah, you get a contrast. Really, contrast is the key in terms of those 3 levels of hierarchy between great compositions and not. And so so how I approach it is I always try to frame things within that. Like what's the primary read, what's the secondary, and then what's the micro aesthetics typographic, because micro aesthetics are really important to great compositions.
I think it's super important too, particularly to I can say this safely, nerdy designers. That's the shit we're paying attention to, right? Is
Absolutely.
That little micro
absolutely,
detail.
yeah.
At least I am too.
And also, all my work is deceptively very gridded. It very much operates within the grid.
I thought one of the most interesting photos in your reel was the one where you shot all the business cards, and kind of like when you step back from it, it's a larger composition, but it's fractured.
Oh,
and
yeah,
it's funny
yeah,
hearing
okay,
you say that thing, because I remember thinking number one, people are going to come up and ask you who shoots all your portfolio
I
photos.
do all that. It's a combination of photo and renderings and Photoshop. So I do all my own portfolio. I haven't updated in 3 years. I probably should get on. I'm just so busy. I just don't.
Yeah, it's terrible what we showed today. So can you please step up your game? What does the beginning of a process look like? And not only setting up for your journal or your graphic novel series, but what's it like a start to a project look like for you? Is it open an artboard and start going, or
no? I'm always pulling resource. I'm filling the well. The creative well. Filling the well. I'm pulling it. I'm a very visual. I'm a conceptual and a visual thinker, and I always start with type. How do I personify the ideas in a typographic form? How do I create the personality, the idea? How is it embodied typographically? And then all the styles, all the ornamentation is derived from the look and feel of the typography. And so I pull references for type, I pull different styles. I always try to keep one foot in the present, one foot in the past. What's classic, what's going to endure, but what's something that's novel? What's a novel approach to that? And I'll pull, sometimes I'll see something super random, but it'll spark an idea. I'm like, oh, what if, and I'm looking for, I call it the Baz Luhrmann principle, is I'm always looking for, so Baz Luhrmann took the Romeo and Juliet. He took an old story, put it in the modern day setting, and suddenly you have something completely fresh. You got, hand me my sword, and it's a shotgun, but it's the sword brand. It's a great idea. It's a great idea. But it's that idea is juxtaposition. I think is at the core of creativity. And so what sparks ideas are usually 2 ideas that have. It's like what's.
It's back to the construction of architecture too, though. It's contrast a lot of times.
Yeah, very much so. Contrast is what are 2 ideas that you wouldn't necessarily associate together, and then the genius in the visual, how you visually relay that, is in finding a common thread between them, and then the form to portray that. And I think that to me is a fascinating part. It's okay, what is that? I'm trying to think.
Is it as part of your process? Is there a hand work done, sketching, anything like that? Or are you more of a digital?
I mostly just because I'm faster digitally, and I've drawn things, and I've drawn so many curves at so many angles now that I'm just way more proficient with my mouse.
It's funny because
mouse.
I'm similar. I don't have the patience to sketch type.
Well, it depends. Sometimes I have clients who demand sketches, and I'm like, okay, fine, I'll give you guys some thumbnails, But and there actually can be a lot of utility in that, because it can be much faster to quickly convey an idea through a sketch and especially if it's editorial work. Editorial work's really stressful, because it's always like, we got 1 week, do it, and it doesn't pay that well, and I'm like, maybe I just want to see my kids tonight, Maybe I want to tuck my kid into bed tonight.
It was actually very endearing to me, because or made me feel like, okay, cool. We have there's kindredness here, because I think people probably seeing your work and the elevated parts of it, but I think most people that I meet in creative spaces these days are also doing work that maybe doesn't end up in the portfolio because it's keeping lights on. And it's funny because you and I were talking about working on things like banner ads or doing emails for somebody.
yeah.
And there's the keep the lights on kind of work. And I do a lot of PowerPoint, and I don't like doing it. But
We all have to do that.
we all have to do it.
Yeah,
And so
sometimes.
it's an interesting thing to even find out at your level that you're still doing that. I think that's a life lesson too, that there are always ditches to be dug. No matter how good you get.
Absolutely. Now I will say, like, I'm at a place now because I'm stretched so thin right now with my MFA, teaching full time, and my family and my studio, that I actually welcome just production work that's super. I don't have to think a lot about. I just execute and bill.
Yes.
I would say, like, I would not have enjoyed that through even. I would say pre-COVID. I did much less of that. COVID kind of changed a lot of the landscape there, where I noticed a big shift that it is harder. It was much harder to get work after COVID, and I don't. And now obviously, AI came in a couple of years ago, but I'm not sure what the full ramification. I think nobody really knows fully. Obviously, it will.
It changed the market.
Absolutely,
for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and the one thing that AI does bring is it creates a lot of sameness, which is never a good thing.
Oddly creates sameness in terms of baseline theme, but its ability to do continuity is also something that is problematic.
Yeah, it's very hard to replicate results.
This is us giving you safety with AI, by the way. Yeah.
Well,
Our jobs are secure.
Well, I can't say with a certainty yet if that is true, but certainly there are many jobs that it will change the landscape of. I mean, we've had many technological revolutions where that happened, and it can create some more opportunity, and it can eliminate a lot of opportunity. We just don't know fully. I don't know if we've ever had a technology. Well, I mean, because we also have extremely articulated robots now too, and we're not too far. I mean, I've seen crazy things robots can do now, and so when you combine it, and not only that, but it's the speed. So with AI, everything keeps getting faster. And we're very close to super intelligence with it, AI is already pretty much more intelligent than most people, at least in its computing mechanisms. It can compute way faster than any of us.
Just its vastness of what it has access to informationally.
Yeah. Now, again, as an interpreter of reality, it can be very, very, very bad in many ways.
Well, and
it can be a
context.
tool. Yeah. And now, as a tool where you use it to, it can be a very useful tool when you're guiding it and doing certain things, and you're only using it as a tool, not a replacement for individual transformation and the journey itself. Because craftsmanship still is an individual pursuit, and when you forego that with AI, I think we lose something as a humanity, and that really worries me, because we always tend to tilt towards convenience. And
I think the people hiring us are starting to tend towards that too, right? Like, because I believe many marketers in the room. If not, I'm sorry if I'm judging you, but like the notion of that they. And even if it's just hearing in the press that like AI has sped all this stuff up, so why can't you do an ad campaign in a day, or why can't we have that logo tomorrow? Like, there's that's some of the problematic stuff. Okay, we're gonna mix it up a little bit here. This is our lightning round, so kind of a few quick fire choices for you. Okay, organic or architectural?
Both. Great. But most great writers are a combination of architecture and organic writing. And so, although my process is architectural, it still has a room for serendipity, and a lot of it's discovered in it. So I can map something out, even in my novel, my storyboards, but it will change quite a bit organically as I execute it.
It was interesting because you mentioned being very griddish in your work too, and I think.
But if it's too grid, it doesn't break the grid enough.
That's the thing.
It becomes very sterile.
That little break of rule can come out. Branding or storytelling? And are they different?
Aren't they simultaneous? I mean, you can have brands that don't necessarily convey story; they're just more functional. But I would lean towards storytelling.
Ancient script or futuristic type?
Ancient script, of course. Of course.
But I think that I see there is in your work. I do see some. I don't want to call it future, but there's a modernity.
Yeah. Again, one foot in the present, one foot in the past is where I like to be. And what the threshold of that is, it just depends on the project.
This is funny. So. Through your work, it's. I imagine you spend time on press, like you're actually looking at like.
I used to spend much more time on press. Now, like I have a vendor I work with, they know exactly what I want, and they'll just ship me if I need a proof. It depends on the project. Sometimes I will go to it, but it just depends on the project.
So it's funny because I had an old print rep that used to run all my work too, and I would send him notes like, "Hey, can we letterpress this? Can we do this? Whatever it is." And we would always get in this discussion of emboss or deboss.
Okay.
Which is which?
Emboss goes out, deboss goes in.
Do you have a favorite?
Depends on the project. Like if you look at my card decks, there's a combination typically of both.
Right.
You have the natural deboss when you foil stamp, and you have the pressure from the foil on it. So that will naturally create a deboss if you do a deep impression. and then I will do emboss in other areas to create a dimensionality to it.
Younger designers right now are Googling
I
emboss.
foil stamped, embossed so many things. I know the thresholds, I know the tolerances I can work within, and also the fringe of what I can experiment with. So I'm always trying to be on the fringe of what I can do.
And is that all happening through communication via email, phone calls, blah, blah? Because if you're not standing there on press, you have a notion of like, mechanically, I know what I need this to do.
Yeah, I mean, I know how to set up the plates, and I know the threshold, because I do really fine lines. And
Yeah.
I know what lines will not reproduce or will bleed into each other. I know, actually, and I design type design. I apply type design to that because you need to like ink traps in typography. And like optimization of a display versus a text weight, those same optimizations apply they were designed for press. And so they work very, very well in your designs and how you optimize it for specialty printing, foil stamping, letterpress, all that. So just naturally by learning that, you get much better at your output for the physical medium.
Yeah, I think that's always the thing. I often ask my design students, how would you cut this out of a piece of metal? Or how would you imprint it on paper?
Yeah.
And then, because like, they give you a logo that you're like, it's super amorphous and...
I mean, a lot of my other stuff will definitely not cut out of metal, but it again depends on the brands. Not all brands have to be cut out of metal, but
right.
But some
it's
brands,
not a requirement, but the physicality.
But it is a good,
it is
a good like a logo that is simple enough to be executed like that. And I try to always have at least like my branding work is very ornate, but if you distill it into its essence, I usually have a very simple icon for it that can work as a fav icon. I mean, all that I build into my systems, and they just scale up in complexity. So you do need to have a mark that can simplify down to a 1/4 inch. Absolutely, yeah.
Learning, teaching, or sharing? You have to pick one.
Got to pick one. Learning. I pick learning. Yeah.
Silence or sound while working? What's your studio like?
I like that. I mean, I can focus. Like I could have a total cacophony of children around me, and I will be able to focus.
You were
I could just
working
tune it
earlier
out.
too.
Yeah, but I typically like to have something on in the background, whether it's a show on that I'm peripherally paying attention to, but I like to have something on.
This one's going to kind of sound, but there's a subtlety to it. Ritual or routine?
I used to play the same song every time I started a project. Zeropa by U2. I don't know. I did that for like a good decade, and I just stopped doing it. I don't know. I'm like, oh, why did I stop doing that? I haven't done it for now. It's been like over a decade that I haven't done it.
So I've had this discussion with a couple of creatives. Would that be your walk-on song?
No.
Like if you were opening, no.
I don't.
Do you have a walk-on song?
No, I don't. What would I try?
Everyone should consider their walk-on song.
Walk-on song. I have no idea. I don't know.
Rules or instinct?
Instincts. Yeah.
It's funny because like what you've talked about, the formation of your background. It is probably very ingrained in you.
Yeah, very intuitive.
All right, last one. And this is potentially inflammatory or riot ensuing.
Okay.
But Adobe or Figma? We ask big questions here, hard questions.
I rarely use Figma.
No kidding.
All of my drawings are in Illustrator. Now Figma is a super useful tool, and it just depends on what I'm working on. But all my intricate stuff, my line work. Now Glyphs is a far superior drawing tool than Illustrator, but I just have a much larger canvas in Illustrator.
Interesting.
And so I just work it.
It's actually not surprising too, because like I'm some identity projects I've been on recently. Like I will display them and walk people through them in Figma, but just the craft isn't in it for me yet. So
yeah, you just can't. I can't draw with 40,000 vector points in Figma. Like it's just not going to work out. But
all right, the purpose of Caffeinated is always to kind of like send all these wonderful people back to wherever they're going next, fired up, inspired. Is there anything right now that has you like personally excited or hopeful? Whether it's work, it's family, it's like what keeps you going?
Keeps me going. I mean. My kids, my wife, my family, and my graphic novel. Like that is like again for better. I'm hoping to launch it next year. I don't know. Maybe people hate it. I don't know. But I feel like I was destined to do it. Like I feel like all my skill set I've learned culminates in it, and so that keeps me up. That wakes me up. Like I get up at 4, 5, 6 in the morning, and I want to work on that. Easy to get up to work on that. Drives me every day.
Are there thresholds in the kind of like, as you move, personal projects for me personally, I feel like sometimes I'm like, I actually will put off like paying work because I'm like, I just need to get this out of my body. Do you feel like you reach points in this graphic novel that you're like, oh, it's finally out. Like, I know what that looks like, or I don't have to carry that anymore. Do you ever have that?
No, I definitely, like, it's been like, it's hard to describe. It's like I've almost felt like it was a weight on me that when I haven't been working on it. Like I've wake up, I'm like, why haven't I been doing this for years? And I'm like, I need to do this. I need to do this. And, life circumstances, having to pay the bills. I mean, a new kid being born or whatever, like derails you a little bit. And then like, I'd say a couple years ago, I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to wake up and feel like that anymore. I'm going to do something about that. And I woke up and I started doing something about that. And
that's cool.
Yeah.
Super cool. Well, thank you, Kevin, for being here. Thank you all
thank you for
being
having me.
here. See you next time.
Yeah.